Welcome to Supply Circles, stories from the innovators, disruptors and improvers in supply chain management today. Brought to you by AI Group.
Hello, I'm James Scotland, coming to you today from Yunganbar country. And this is the podcast that asks the question, how can we in Australia create supply chains that are resilient and sustainable at a time when we're implementing the challenges of the 3 Ds? You know them: digitalisation to keep up with your peers in the industries and to build efficiencies, decarbonisation to meet your legal requirements and targets by 2050 in some states even earlier, and diversification to build sustainability into our business offerings and processes by reducing the dependence on single relationships, whether that's a product, a technology, a supply chain, or an export market. Today, let's talk about the middle D, decarbonisation. The decarbonisation of our businesses, of our industries and of our economy. Let's talk about the emerging large-scale decarbonisation industry, hydrogen. Everyone knows about hydrogen, but they don't really know about it. It's kind of a mystery. Let's find out. My guest for today's coffee chat is Joanna Kay, General Manager of Hydrogen for the Smart Energy Council of Australia. Hello and welcome, Joanna. Are you a coffee or tea kind of girl?
Actually, tea. Don't drink coffee, which is makes everyone concerned when I say that, actually. But I certainly do get my caffeine in a can form at various times when needed. But I love a herbal tea.
I was going to say, how do you get so much energy? All the energy that you have, how do you get that if you're not over-caffeinated? I thought you were just a caffeine freak.
So excited to be talking about hydrogen. So can't get any more excited and energized to have this discussion, James. There you go.
Nice segue. Well, let's start at the beginning. Why is hydrogen such a front and center part of the decarbonisation challenge? Why is it, and is it a big part of the post-carbon world?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I always frame it as it's not the only part of the decarbonisation discussion, right? Hydrogen is just one piece of the puzzle, but it's actually one of the more important pieces of the puzzle, because hydrogen actually has the opportunity to decarbonise areas of industry that historically can't be decarbonised through renewables or through other mechanisms. So we use the likes of green hydrogen, so hydrogen produced using renewable energy in these heavy industrial processes as like a chemical project or in shipping or aviation, and any of these kind of really difficult industrial processes that we can decarbonise. We actually have the opportunity to make a significant impact here in Australia, but also obviously on a global scale as well. I always think, people think, what really is hydrogen? It's so polarizing. We don't talk about it enough. It's not really part of our everyday conversation. So think back to your, year 10 high school teacher when they talked about hydrogen. It's a molecule made up of two hydrogen atoms and oxygen is your water molecule, and a green hydrogen or renewable hydrogen is simply splitting those molecules and pulling out those hydrogen atoms to be able to use. So it's not complicated. People have been doing hydrogen for hundreds of years. Actually, I think we even coined the term hydrogen economy in Australia many moons ago at Adelaide University. So it's not a new process, but it's certainly one that's of interest globally, and we have a real opportunity to use it to make a really big difference to our industrial processes.
Yeah, on a very, very basic level, and then don't throw things at me for being so very basic, but if you have water, you separate hydrogen, the two parts of hydrogen from the air. The offlow of the process is oxygen, as opposed to some horrible pollutant. And then often that oxygen can be used.
Yeah, sorry, it is just oxygen and sometimes even just water vapor.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. And that water vapor or the oxygen, whatever, can be used to go back into the process of creating the hydrogen in the first place, which is electrolysis. Let's get to that in a second. But according to High Resource, which is an information source from CSIRO, there are 93 major hydrogen projects under consideration or under construction, or even better, in Australia today. 93 in Australia alone. That's a lot of hydrogen, I imagine. Is that all for domestic use, or is it going to be exported, or what's the story with hydrogen?
Yeah, it's a bit of both actually. But to give you some context around those numbers, James, it's actually 20% of the global pipeline of hydrogen projects. So if you think about,
really,
yeah, it's massive. So Australia has got like one of the biggest plays and the biggest opportunities in and around hydrogen, which is it's just extraordinary. It also equates to about 235 billion or a little bit more of opportunity and investment into Australia as well. So these are big numbers. But yeah, it's a bit of both, right? So there's lots of things hydrogen can be used for. We're certainly seeing domestically the opportunity around green ammonia. So think about it for like fertilizer production. We're also seeing it for the processing of green metals. So taking our iron ore commodities and actually doing some of that heavy processing of those onshore using green hydrogen, and then shipping green iron overseas to help with green steel production to some of our key trading partners. So there's a huge domestic play for hydrogen. There's also a massive international play, and I think we spoke just before I left for Japan. I've just come back from Japan as well to have a conversation about that international play as well.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say those sort of numbers, 235 billion and a large percentage of the world. My former co-host on a separate podcast, Paul Hodson, who's now the director for the Centre of Hydrogen and Renewable Energies at CQ University, and he's also the vice chair of Hydrogen Flight Alliance. He once said on this particular podcast, Australia built an LNG industry from scratch to world leader in just 20 years. And so, we're well positioned to do the same thing for hydrogen, to be an absolute world leader when it comes to this sort of new post-carbon energy source. Would you agree? Are we on track to become a world leader, or there's a lot of competition? What's the situation?
Yeah, it's great. And look, that's such a great quote because, we hear in the industry a lot, like it's too much, it's too difficult, it's this and that. But we have to remember the success that we had about establishing an LNG industry back in the 80s, right? We did it off the back of nothing. And we created this huge industry that Australia now relies so heavily on for our economy and for jobs and certainly in particular regional areas in Australia. And the reality is that the demand for that product is decreasing because our trading partners, particularly in the region, have their own decarbonisation pathways that they're working on. They also have international agreements that they've signed up on. So people are moving away from that industry. So we need to back end that industry, and here's renewable hydrogen, and here's an option to do that. So we've done it before. We've seen the patterns. There is no way that we can't replicate it and learn from the things that we've done the first time and do it even better the second time. So I applaud that quote actually, because it is so potent and so important that we talk about that. The second part is, will Australia be a world leader? Look, I think in 2018 we came out with a national hydrogen strategy. We were the third country globally behind Japan and Germany to have a national hydrogen strategy. Everybody was looking at Australia and saying Australia will be the world leader in hydrogen back then. Look, a lot of stuff has happened since then. We've obviously...
Was that 2012, did you say?
No, 2018.
That's a long time ago. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, it is. And so that was headed up by Dr. Alan Finkel at the time. He was one of the key writers of that first document. And we've just released the new reiteration of that document. And I'm proud to be part of the rewrite team of that and part of that advisory board from industry that helped craft that to come forward. Look, it's a great document. It's really clear and concise, and it puts Australia back on the path of where we need to be that world leader. Between the time of the first release and the second release, the entire world shifted on what could happen. Obviously, the global pandemic affected our energy supplies. It affected the way the world was running and whatnot for many reasons. We also had a huge disruption in energy supply when Russia invaded Ukraine. So first and foremost, there were countries that had never really been affected by energy security, suddenly found themselves in a position where energy security was front and centre. We also had the US release the Inflation Reduction Act during that time as well. Now, you can call the IRA whatever you like, but the reality is that was all about securing the US's position against China and holding that fort. So they were repositioning themselves. It's a bipartisan climate policy. I thought it would never have been called that in order to get it passed. So the Inflation Reduction Act caused a huge stir globally in that it kind of ruffled a lot of feathers and changed the way people did things and created some urgency off the back of these supply chain issues that happened in Ukraine. So Canada responded straight away. The Europeans responded with the Green Industrial Plan. Korea, Japan, India all responded. Australia was actually rather late in their response, if I can be completely frank. So last year in our budget, there are 20, gosh, what's the year we're in? It's 20, like last year's 23, 24 budget.
23, 24.
Yeah, so I need more caffeine, James.
What day are we?
Yeah. Exactly. What month is it? Where am I? Who am I? So back in last year's budget, 23-24, was the release or the announcement around a hydrogen Head Start funding. That was $2 billion to kind of help first movers of these large scale hydrogen production facilities in Australia kind of have some subsidy support to be able to create or de-risk some of these projects to kind of get them off the ground. That was last year. That was what we called at the time a down payment on the response to the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, this year, our budget kind of came out and we saw a lot of funding support for hydrogen. We saw a lot more of the Australians' response to the Inflation Reduction Act and also like our Future Made in Australia program and what that looks like. So things shifted in the last 12 to 18 months to kind of realign Australia's position in hydrogen and actually refocus. And I said it on the night of the budget in Parliament House. I said it the next day doing media. Australia is back in the race. For a long time, we kind of were sitting in idle. I think we were resting on our laurels a little bit. We have this kind of advantage of having such a great abundance of solar, of wind to create the renewables, to create the hydrogen. But we also have all of these other things which are extraordinary. We have a great investment portfolio and conditions in Australia. We can attract, and certainly the changes to the foreign investment, the FIRB changes that have recently come out certainly help with that attraction of foreign investment into our economy. We also have really clear and direct trading routes to our key partners in Asia that are non-contested, which is very helpful and very secure. And we also have like relationships and an export industry and partners that we've been working on through other industries for years, right? Like if you think about Japan, we've been trading with Japan for over 70 years on energy of different forms. So all of these things make Australia a really good place for hydrogen. And then backed in with this policy changes and this public support over the last 18 months, we're now back in the contention of being one of the best in the world. That 20% of the global pipeline hasn't come by accident. It's actually a really calculated measure by industry to say, actually, we have all these conditions here and we can make a difference. Now, the reality is this is not, it's a climate opportunity, but it's a huge economic opportunity for Australia as well. The second part of all of this is we are in a global race, right? We are not the only ones that are trying to get hydrogen off the ground. Those in the Middle East have also, like Dubai, United Emirates, all that kind of region, as well as like Chile has a hydrogen strategy that's dedicated at our kind of export partners as well. We are playing in a very competitive space. We need to keep the momentum up, but there is no reason that Australia will not be the leader in hydrogen production by 2050. And I think that's the timelines we have to look at. And if you look at the National Hydrogen Strategy, you can certainly see the focus there. Sorry, that was a very long answer to say, we're there. We're getting there. We're getting there. I apologise for that.
Well, I mean, there's a few things. There's a few things in there, and you answered some of the questions I was going to ask. Actually, interestingly, on earlier this week, I was at a cocktail party with Australian Industry Group and a bunch of Chilean businesses. businesses from Chile, and several of them were from the hydrogen or renewable energy industry, and they were talking about how Australia is a natural partner when it comes to this. The other point from your comments was I keep saying to people, if you think that the Arab Emirates and the people who have made billions of dollars out of oil up for the last 30 years are just going to sit back and say, oh, well, we had a good shot, that'll be fine, we'll just go back to being a little trading partner and leave hydrogen to other people, you're mad, because they're going to be really aggressive in trying to make sure they've got sustainability. So hydrogen is going to be highly contested. Which led me to this question of, well, why do we want to be the world leader? We're a long way from markets, but I pick up your point of we've got good trading relations, we've got stable government, we've got all the things that could possibly help us win this. Is that your basic point? We want to be the world leader because we can be.
Yeah, look, I think we have to be as well. I think we have to actually think about it from Australia. Future-proofing Australia and Australia's economy. I think we can't rely on the fact that our coal or our iron ore people are going to continue buying non-green iron ore in the future for steel supply. I think we need to understand that there is a market that people want this, and so it's a kind of like, the rest of the world is doing this. Do we either be part of that and actually be successful of it, or do we kind of sit back and say, oh, it's a little bit too tricky and we're not too sure, and then we get really left behind, and then we have markets and our GDP relying on all of these export commodities or domestic commodities that are no longer have any kind of value in the mechanism. And just on your point, James, you said we're far from kind of trading partners. We're not, though, right? Like, we think about where we sit geographically in the region and who are our biggest kind of off-takers for iron ore, or potentially who could be our biggest off-takers for like liquefied hydrogen or green ammonia. The India is certainly, well, they have their own ambitions for domestic hydrogen production and also export. There is certainly going to be a demand there as well. There's certainly a demand in, if you think about Singapore, and then like maritime, SAF or sustainable aviation fuel. So far from anywhere else, like, why can't we be a hub for it as well down here? So I think there's big opportunities. I think we have to be focused on what those opportunities are. We've tried to certainly do that in the National Hydrogen Strategy.
Yeah, I think that's, again, whilst the Arab nations won't sit back and say, we've had our time, that was great, we also have to recognise that we make a lot of money out of coal. So if coal goes, where are we going to fill the coffers from? Yeah, good point.
Yeah, so look, when I think about like the Middle East, if you think about the trading routes and the actual like geographic way that a ship would come to Australia or to the region, and we can probably reset that actually, we think about that area of the world, the Middle East, and you think about some of the trading routes, they're not direct lines. They're not as fast or as smooth as the ones that come from Australia. So that is a point of difference when you think about it from a cost perspective. It's a little bit still more expensive to produce green hydrogen here in Australia, but there's also other elements that come to the cost as well. So that trading route is pretty important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, this is fundamentally a supply chain podcast. So let's ask the two obvious questions. well, there's three questions. First off, isn't hydrogen difficult to transport? I thought it was expensive and difficult. Is that just an urban myth?
It's not an urban myth. I think there's certainly science behind it. We need to improve the way that we do it, but those improvements are happening all the time. There's certainly a lot of people a lot smarter than me that have done a lot of modelling and analysis on this that still deem it a really acceptable way of transporting it. So we certainly have members in our space that are looking at liquefied hydrogen, that are certainly looking at ammonia for shipping as well. But when we talk about like the iron ore, the green metals kind of conversation, embedded decarbonisation, like that's much easier to ship, right? Because you're already doing the processing of the iron ore or the magnetite, particularly here in South Australia. You can process that here, you can clean it, you make it into nice little pellets So you get more bang for your buck on the boat, and you ship it across in the most simple terms. So there's a lot more to it, obviously, but I think there's the narrative that it's problematic is slowly waning because the technology and innovation is continuously improving.
All right. The next question is a fundamental of supply chain is that you get your important resources as close to your market as possible. But if we're going to make it here and sell it in Japan, where we're sort of a long way from the market, why don't Japan just make hydrogen? It's a simple easy process. You 2 parts hydrogen to 1 part water. Why don't they make it closer there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a little bit more to it. Space, size of these
I'm sure
facilities.
There's a lot more to it.
Yeah, I'm not an engineer, but I've been told it's a bit more technical, James. But it's space is an issue, right? Like, so if you think about countries that are really heavily populated, of which most of the Asian countries are, land space to actually create the renewables, to be able to then create the electrolysis process, to power the electrolysis process to create the hydrogen is difficult. But what we do see, and particularly from my recent trip to Japan, is that their ports are really well set up to receive liquefied hydrogen or green ammonia in a way that they can then use it and do those industrial processes. So I think if I can just take one step back, I think every country wants to have energy security or sovereign security in a way. And I've spent a lot of my career thinking about security in regards to national security, to water security, to energy security. And we're now having this really interesting conversation, particularly, there's been some significant global things that have happened within the last 48 hours, I'll say, James, that have actually changed or perhaps, disrupted a bit of the geopolitical standpoint of where people see certain nations and what it looks like. Everyone wants to have some kind of level of security around what they can do. Japan, for instance, they have to import about, I think it's over 90% of their energy. So they have only about 6 or 8%, and forgive me if I'm muddling these numbers, but it's a huge portion of their energy demand is actually imported. So their desire to have energy security is fundamental to the way that they are thinking about things going forward. So what Australia needs to do, and I'm using Japan as an example, but I think every country is going through the same thing in a nuanced way, is how do we supply and create a domestic opportunity for us to be able to secure our own supply of energy, whether that be through renewables or through like imported energy sources like renewable hydrogen. With Japan particularly, they will never be able to produce the energy that they need to actually create the manufacturing, for the AI data centers, for the work that they do in Japan. They will just never be able to do it because of the land mass and the processes that they have at the moment. They need to import their energy. So what they want is a trusted trading partner. They want someone who can actually have a direct shipping line to make sure that there's not going to be disruptions because the Suez Canal is blocked or there's contested waters. They also want to be able to have someone who they've had a relationship with for a long period of time. And they also need to be able to have someone that's going to give them and provide them a secure supply. Now, Australia needs to be able to achieve all of those things. And it would be remiss of us to think we're not the only ones doing that, right? But Australia has to think about this in a domestic context as well. What do we need to power our create green cement or process our critical or strategic minerals or power our heavy industrial processes here? How do we bring that to Australian shores and what do we do? So what we're seeing is like big industrial zones being set up in existing industrial zones, right? Like think of Gladstone. How do we actually transition those into being green industrial zones so that they can continue, that jobs can continue to grow, communities can continue to grow, and actually create and deliver Australia's domestic energy needs, but also support our allies in securing their energy needs as well. We've gone from having a world where everyone was quite comfortable with having, supply chains with one person and all of these kind of conversations. But now we know that it's a multipolar world. It's a geopolitical world that we live in, where certain powers are no longer as powerful as they are, and other powers are starting to emerge for different reasons. And we now know that we need to have diversification. As you know, there's a diversification conversation around supply chains. We need to have that. We need to have that for our own sake, but we also need to have that for our allies in the region as well.
Yeah, when we were talking about wind power or renewable power in regards to Japan, it's a bunch of islands. It's pretty small. They're not blessed with land, and if they try to put the wind turbines offshore, it's very, very deep water, so they can't secure it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a typhoon area. And the seas themselves are contested. It's not like no one's going to contest them over it. So it's just not an answer. They need to find other answers. And I think if you go around the world, you see a whole lot of countries like that. Whereas on our side, we can tick a lot of good boxes, as you've said several times.
We have all the boxes. Yeah, we have all the boxes. So in my previous role, I worked a lot across I looked over Asia and the Pacific. So I looked a lot at the Pacific countries, and it's very difficult to find land in the Pacific. It's very difficult to find areas in the Pacific that you're able to build wind turbines or roll out a whole lot of solar. We looked at floating solar. So there's a whole lot of challenges for every kind of area of the world for different reasons. There's also like community challenges as well, right? So we have conversations in Australia where some parts of community are very much opposed to some parts of renewables, and it's the same in other parts of the world as well. So it's challenging, but we will get there, and it will be amazing, and we'll have hopefully a decarbonised world on the back of hydrogen.
We got so quickly into talking about this, as we always do, because it's always a great conversation, that I forgot to say, tell us about the Joanna Kay story. How did you end up where you are? What's your backstory? What's your front story? I mean, either way, just tell us about you.
Yeah, so well, thank you. That's lovely. I'm based here in Adelaide, down in South Australia, on the land of the Kaurna people, actually, in Adelaide Plains. But I've spent the last 13, 14 years overseas, actually. So I did a decade in China, working in our diplomatic missions in Beijing, Shanghai, and Chengdu, down in southwest China, and then I did some time in India, working in New Delhi. I think my last position was the most interesting, in that I was actually seconded out to the International Solar Alliance. So I worked as the Australian Government Specialist Advisor to the ISA, and then I had a functional role of being the Senior Advisor for Asia and the Pacific. So covering pretty much the entire area that we've talked about today. So right across in the far west of Asia, looking at the Middle East, all the way across to the islands in the Pacific. Now, the ISA, International Solar Alliance, was created by Prime Minister Modi, along with the French president, and it's really about positioning India as being the leader of the global south and bringing solar energy to the masses, particularly those along the equator and small island developing nations. So it was an extraordinary opportunity to be there and to have those conversations, and I guess that access more globally. Was the only a few foreigners in the organisation at the time. Actually, I was one of the only ones there at the time. So just having the opportunity to be embedded into your host country government system was extraordinary, and I really appreciate the leadership of Dr. AJ Matur there as well. But then I came back to Australia, and I started with John Grimes and the Smart Energy Council looking at hydrogen. It seemed like a natural fit. And now I work across hydrogen and resources, and certainly look at how we can position Australia in the global conversation, but also how we can certainly make sure that Australian businesses are well positioned to adapt to global changes and global opportunities.
Well, that's a great CV. That explains why you can explain the situation regarding hydrogen so well and in such detail. And so absolute delight to have you on the podcast. We should take a break and then come back about business and hydrogen. Before we do, just a personal question. Let me think what's a good person. if you take off your business suit and put on your happy pants, what part of the world, what town, what city are you going to have a nice 4-day break?
That's a really good question.
What's your favourite escape?
Yeah. But there's an ongoing joke that I say at the Smart Energy Council. There's once we've dealt with all of this this climate action and we've created a new industry, you'll find us all in Bora Bora. I think that's
sure.
That would be wonderful. But no, I'm a Kiwi, so I love to go home to the Southern Alps and climb those mountains and get some fresh air. And it's an extraordinary, beautifully part of the world. So that's where you'll find me.
I have a friend who's Slovenian. She's from Slovenia, and she hikes in the hills there at Switzerland and done all the great stuff. She's just spent a month in the South Island of New Zealand saying it is the best place she's ever been in the world, and she's been everywhere. So I always forget how beautiful it is.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah, I fly to Queenstown, and every time I look at the window, I know how beautiful it is. Look at the window and go, no, I don't. I forgot how beautiful it was, yeah.
I know. I had the pleasure of living in Switzerland when I was younger, and I remember my first morning, I kind of arrived late in the afternoon and it was overcast and a bit gloomy, which Switzerland can be at times. And the next morning I woke up and opened the curtains and there was the Eiger right outside my window, which was pretty extraordinary. Yep.
Well, something happened to me. I was in a small town in Bavaria, South Germany, and I was bike riding or cycling, and I rode there, and it was a crappy afternoon. Had a good night, went to sleep, woke up, got back on the bike, and about 5 minutes later I went, holy dolly, look at this. And the mountains and the snow-capped mountains and the green fields and just spectacular. Yeah. Let's protect this world.
That's right. That's exactly right. New Zealand is beautiful, and it's nice to be a Kiwi because, we always win the rugby. That's why.
Well,
take a break.
Do you know if you want to become an Australian, you have to do a nationality test, and there's a question in there that says how many times has Australia beaten the All Blacks at rugby? And the correct answer is not enough.
Well, yes, that is true.
We'll take a break and be back in a second.
The largest Australian workplace changes in over a decade
Underpaying workers could result in crippling fines.
There'll be new rules about when a casual employee has the right
employees will have the right
to disconnect.
Workplace laws are changing. Pay attention or pay the price. Safeguard your business with Australian Industry Group. The legal experts at Australian Industry Group will help you navigate the new legislation and prepare your business for the changes. Become a member today at aigroup.com.au.
Joanna, let's talk about how hydrogen's manufactured, and from that talk about the supply chain and how businesses would be or could be affected by hydrogen. There's a lot of big projects. Is that the only way to make hydrogen? Is it the obvious way to make hydrogen? Just talk about the process itself.
Yeah, look at it. There's a whole range and scale that you can produce hydrogen. So we see really small scale hydrogen production behind the meter for microgrids, for small communities or remote communities. We see it as an opportunity to certainly back end some of these industrial precincts as well. Overseas, people are producing and creating hydrogen within their homes to be able to heat their homes. I don't suggest that we'll be doing it like that in Australia, but there's a whole scale of hydrogen production that we see, and I guess the first part of the conversation really focused on that top end, and we have some of the 6 largest hydrogen projects that are in the making at the moment in Australia. Central Queensland Hydrogen Project being one of them will produce about 200 tonnes of hydrogen per day. I think in its first couple of years up to 800 tonnes of hydrogen a day when it's at full production in early 2030. So these are the scale is tremendous. One of the challenges we have for hydrogen is the economies, the economics, making it work financially, and we can get that through economies of scale. So once we've got these big projects up and running, we'll certainly see a lot more supply and value chain benefits that will come out for others to kind of process that going forward as well. But we see like one-off sites being decarbonised. We see it happening a lot in mining. So big opportunity there.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of commentary that it's possible we'll have electrolyzers or hydrogen production out the back of a mine somewhere to fuel to create electricity for the mines, but unlikely to be behind the small suburban workshop in Toorak. Do you think that's probably the next phase? That it's not going to be in the suburbs, or be out in the backwaters somewhere?
Yeah, I just don't think we need it in the suburbs yet, right? So, we can electrify really well in Australia. We have such a good uptake of rooftop solar and solar penetration. It would seem superfluous to kind of throw hydrogen into the mix of that kind of production. But like, of course, we see it a lot. Decarbonisation of mining and hydrogen production in mining is huge. Also, fuel cells in some of those freight trains as well. So picking up so using hydrogen to power those big heavy trucks that are pulling the minerals out of the ground, and then powering the transport to get it to the port as well. So that whole value chain, that whole supply chain transportation part can be decarbed with hydrogen. And you think about mines as a bit of hub and spoke models, really. Like, you can actually produce it quite a bit and transport it to the mines or produce on the site.
Yeah. Years ago, I went to the Hunter Valley and went to a coal mine, and they were using solar power to light the coal mines. It seemed like an anomaly, but it makes a lot of sense and save as much money as they can. Yeah. Are we going to see hydrogen cars?
We already have hydrogen cars, James. So we have, particularly, have you not seen the photos of Mick Debretti having his pie and his Diet Coke at the fuel station?
I've sat in them, and I haven't gone for a ride in one, but I've sat in them and looked at the boot and the trunk and everything. But they're not really taking off the way that EVs or BEVs are.
Yeah. Look, you're absolutely right. I say it a bit tongue in cheek, but look, they're great vehicles, and we certainly see the value in fleets. So when you have like a large group of vehicles, certainly power them by hydrogen is great. The reality is, in Australia, I don't think we're going to see hydrogen-powered vehicles for passengers, for the likes of you and me to drive around town just yet. But it is actually going ahead in leaps and bounds in other parts of the world. So in Europe, I had a friend send me a photo of a petrol station, and it had the diesel and unleaded, blah blah blah, and it had hydrogen, so you could fill up your hydrogen car as just as easily as you could fill up anything else. So I think we'll see it. Like, we'll see it in time. The big car manufacturers are spending a lot of money on hydrogen fuel cell cars and what that looks like. There's also talk about being able to kind of take out the tanks and put them in. Again, I'm not an engineer, but there's a whole lot of stuff happening, particularly in Europe, around it. I think it's a matter of time. I know Australians like to be able to drive really long distances, and there's concerns about, not being able to charge your Tesla in time. But I think, we have a great network for EVs. So I think first and foremost, that should be our focus. But maybe in 15 or 20 years' time, we'll be driving one of those fancy new BMW hydrogen-powered cars, perhaps to Surfers Paradise to see you, James.
Well, I always say, and I spoke at your conference not so long ago, I always say to people that say, we like to drive long distances, but we can't necessarily take the battery vehicle out there. And so the reason you can drive long distances is that we put the infrastructure in place for you to fuel up when you get out there. It hasn't always been there. You had to take petrol tanks with you to get anywhere. We just built the infrastructure. So the infrastructure will come. It's sort of like a false argument tonight. It's just people looking for reasons why not.
I get it a lot in I get it a lot in South Australia, because people say, I can't drive to Melbourne in one go. And I was like, who's driving to Melbourne from Adelaide in one go? Not having a break to refuel or like to, have a coffee or something to recharge the car.
That's right.
It's
it's
bonkers. Yeah.
Well, I mean, a lot of electric vehicles can do 600 kilometres. So if you can drive 600 kilometres without without having to pee, you're doing better than most people.
That's right. Our Tesla's great. Our kids love it. It's very comfy for long drives. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had the EV guys on the podcast, and I asked them, are you going to take away all the fun of driving by forcing us into an EV? And he said, go hire one, go to a rental place and drive one, see what you think. And I said, you're not going to try and sell me? He said, I don't have to sell you, just go and hire one. So strong argument.
I was going to say one more thing. There's this really interesting project in New Zealand, and I know we are completely off track, but there's a really interesting program in New Zealand that are doing EV chargers at all the maraes. Now, maraes are Maori places of connection, of community, and historically the places where people come back to meet, right? And so what they've been able to do is create infrastructure that supports bringing people back to the maraes. And so you've also got an entire network around New Zealand. In every community, in every area of New Zealand, there is a marae that now has an EV charger. So you've created this link between Indigenous culture and infrastructure and renewables and bringing people back. And it's a brilliant project. And, it would be great if we could do something similar, and you can see it working in other parts of the world as well, where you've got really strong links back to community.
And connection to the land, that's the point. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Sorry, so that was a segue, but let's go back.
Well, like I said, it's a coffee chat, so we can go wherever we feel like, or a cup of tea chat if you have to be. One of the nice things about the LNG industry was that it required so much support from local businesses, from SMEs, and some people, like me, did pretty well out of building supply chains for the LNG industry with small businesses. It feels like that's not the same for hydrogen. It's sort of self-contained. It's a very simple process. Does not need a lot of business support. Is that true?
I don't know, actually, James, because I think we're at the point now where we've got new players in. It's a new industry, right? We're a nascent industry, so everyone is playing for the first time. And so I think the opportunity presents itself to anybody. And I had this conversation with someone recently in regards to green iron, right? And if you are a proponent that is, I'll use this example actually. We've got a member company that has 5 magnetite mines in South Australia. They own some port infrastructure and they own some rail infrastructure. They want to be able to produce green iron using hydrogen. Now, they're miners. They have no idea what they're doing when it comes to hydrogen. They've got no idea what renewables, like how to integrate that. There's a huge opportunity for the people that know those things to be able to go in there, right? So it doesn't have to be a self-contained or a small part of the industry. Actually, the opportunities are there because everybody is learning at the same time, right? Stanwell's another one. They're producing one of the largest hydrogen production facilities in the world with the CQH2 program in Gladstone. Now, that's the first time they're doing hydrogen. So they need people that understand hydrogen. And there's a lot of people that have been working in hydrogen for the last 20, 30 years that have, been working on electrolyzers in their garage or fuel cells, and they're ready to go, and they've got technology that can be commercialized and used at scale. And I think that's kind of what's really nice about the Australian hydrogen industry is everyone's kind of working together to make it work, right? Like it's competitive in that we're all trying to make it work from a commercial sense, but actually everyone's super open to collaborating and engaging and making it work for everyone, the big players, the small players, and those medium-sized players as well.
Well, let's finish talking about the industry, the role of the hydrogen industry in the future economy. The question we get asked is, where does it all sit? Where does it all sit? And I read Dr. Andrew Barton, who's an energy expert from a company called Hatch & Co. He said that he wants to see a united shift that turns the energy market inside out. Here's the quote. He says, "We need to accelerate our efforts to drive forward the transformation of energy and power systems. Our goal should be to forge a sustainable roadmap immediately that balances the optimistic drive with a focus on Australia's unique challenges and advantages." He's basically saying much of what you said. We've got lots of advantages, but we need to be all working together very focused. So to round us out, to take us out of today's podcast, tell us why you think we should have integrated focus of all energy sources, or argue the opposite? Whatever you think.
Yeah, look, I think it's a great quote. It's a hard question to finish on because it's a bit nuanced. But look, hydrogen plays a key part in this energy mix. It's going to be a key part of our future. And I think I often say this is that what we actually need is the public to understand what the opportunity is for hydrogen. So this isn't something that has to be so isolated or polarizing. It's actually going to be part of everyone's everyday life in some way or form. And I say that because we'll be perhaps using hydrogen to power aircrafts, and next time you have a travel or trip to Bali, you might be on a sustainable aviation fueled aircraft, or you might, be getting truck deliveries from Coles or Woolies that's using hydrogen powered, or your rubbish is picked up from a hydrogen powered vehicle. Then you also might benefit from some of these areas that are exporting commodities with embedded decarbonisation from hydrogen, or some of these industrial processes that have been decarbonised. I think we really need to understand that it's part of the energy mix. It's not the only part of the energy mix. We're talking about it as molecules. There are a whole lot of great electrons out there that Australia is terrific at producing. We have an abundance of rooftop solar. We have a huge opportunity for wind here in Australia. And we can actually make a difference domestically, but we can actually make a really big difference globally. And I think Australia has to think about it in that context, and we have to think about the kind of moral obligation we have to our partners in the Pacific and the obligations we have to others. But at the end of the day, to be completely frank with you, James, this is an economic opportunity for Australia. We need to think about what the future looks like and what our future commodities and how they'll sell and the prices that they'll sell for as that demand continues to decrease and people are looking for green and clean exports and imports. And Australia has an opportunity, and we should, to be frank, should be capitalising it for all of our sakes.
Yeah, well said. Beautifully said, Joanna. Yeah. Also, as you said, it's very, 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 very nuanced. There's a whole bunch of sovereign energy protection, moving away from being very exposed in other areas, making sure it's sustainable, making sure our economy continues to grow. So much to it. It's been great chatting to you and getting to understand how the hydrogen part of it fits together. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, James. And next time I'll make sure I have more tea on hand, I think. It's been great. Snacks as well, maybe.
Snacks, yeah. Well, that's it for another episode of Supply Circles. Thanks again to everyone for listening, and thanks for your feedback. If you have any feedback on today's interview with Joanna or ideas for the show, or just want to give me some feedback, hit me up at james.scotland@aigroup.com.au or head over to my LinkedIn page. I'd love to hear from you. This is the last episode for the year, so we'll be back next year with more business insights into the keys to building sustainable supply chains. Thanks for joining me. This is Supply Circles. I'm James Scotland. Bye for now.